The Iliad and the Odyssey, Act 8, by Rosemary Sutcliff. Here are your new vocabulary words for Act 8 of the Iliad and the Odyssey. Crest, very top of a mountain or a head. A mantle, a sleeveless cloak or shawl. Mantle is a multiple meaning word. You can have a mantle, that big wooden piece above a fireplace. Bind or bound, fastened tightly. Mad, crazy, and insane. Mad can also just mean angry. Jest is a joke that's not serious. Mock is to make fun of someone. Jeer, rude, mocking insults. Don, put on clothing. Scepter, staff carried by a king. Weary, very tired and exhausted. Temper, state of mind, calm or upset. Humor, mood or feelings. Scorn, contempt or despising. And to check yourself means to stop suddenly. That's another multiple meaning word. You know, you can cash a check at the bank too. The father of the gods considered for a long time how the thing should best be done. And that night he sent a false dream to Agamemnon as he lay sleeping in his hall. The dream took the shape of wise old Nestor, who stood beside the high king's bed. Then Nestor told him, "King and Lord of kings, make the war host ready for battle. For if you attack Troy this coming day, Zeus promises to you the victory, and only grief and loss to the Trojan people." When Agamemnon woke and saw the gray dawnlight in his doorway, he felt great hope. But as the light strengthened, he remembered that dreams can lie. He was always one whose mood swung him first one way and then the other. When he rose, instead of donning his war gear and ordering out his heralds with the call to arms, he put on his robe and mantle and took his scepter of olive wood bound with gold and summoned the kings and captains to hear his dream and advise him about it. His own doubts spread to the men listening to him, and there was no eager cry for battle, but only men looking doubtfully at each other. Then the high king suggested a mad thing. He said that he would test the temper of the army. He would summon them all together and tell them that the siege had already dragged on too long, and the time had come when they should run their ships down into the water, burn the camp behind them, and set sail for Greece. If the warriors took him at his word, however, the leaders were to turn them back before they reached the ships, and he would try to put fresh heart into them. But the siege had indeed dragged on too long. The warriors' hopes had sunk low, and they were weary for their own homes and their wives and children, left too long behind. As soon as they heard what Agamemnon had to say, they rose up like a sea before the west wind, and shouting joyfully, made for the ships with the dust rolling up in a cloud behind them, and their captains were as eager as all the rest. Only Odysseus stood firm, shouting to the chieftains that the high king did but jest, and shameful thing it would be to leave the siege now when they had spent so long upon it. Taking in his hand the royal scepter to use as a staff, he was like a cattle dog and herded the warriors back to the gathering place. They returned at last, though in an ugly humor, puzzled and without heart. They didn't literally not have a heart. They were just very disappointed. In the previous slide, it talked about Odysseus herding the warriors back to the meeting place, just like a cattle dog herds cows. And here's a beautiful picture of two cattle dogs keeping that herd of cows in check. But one of them protested, an ugly bow-legged fellow named Thersites, who jumped out before the rest and began a jeering speech, insulting the leaders and telling the war host to run away, for the leaders were not worth following. Odysseus, knowing that he must be silenced quickly and the mood of the war host must be changed, took and beat him with the scepter until the blood came and Thersites wept like a baby. Odysseus flung him down, laughing at the sight he made. Those nearest joined in the laughter, and the laughter spread out to the farmost fringes of the army, where men did not even know what they laughed at. The warriors hitched up their weapons and cheered Odysseus when he and white-haired Nestor bade them make ready for battle in the name of the high king. So company by company, following their kings and chiefs and captains, the Greeks harnessed the captured horses to their chariots and swept out across the plain in great wheeling masses, like cranes sweeping in from distant lands to their own marshes at mating time. In the previous slide, they talked about hooking the horses up to their chariots, and here's a beautiful illustration of that. And the Trojans, taking heart from the knowledge that Achilles had turned his back on the fighting, came pouring out from their city to meet them. For the first time in all the long years of the siege, the two great war hosts came face to face. They checked, fronting each other in two long, menacing battle lines, and out from the Trojan mass into the clear space between swaggered Paris himself, a spotted panther skin slung across his shoulder, and in his hands 2 bronze-headed spears. He shouted a challenge to the Greek lines to any warrior who would come out and meet him in single combat. Menelaus, the rightful husband of Helen, was glad as a lion is happy about his kill, and leapt from his chariot, his armor flashing in the sun. But Paris, seeing who came against him, felt his heart shrink within him from shame as much as fear, and fell back into the ranks of the Trojan host behind him. There Hector found him and tongue-lashed him in scorn for his cowardice, and managed to drive courage back into him again. And while the courage lasted, Paris offered a formal bargain to end the war one way or the other by fighting Menelaus, a fight to the death. If Paris was killed, Helen, with all her jewels upon her, would be returned to her first husband and her own people. But if Menelaus died, she should remain with Paris and the Trojans, and the Greeks would go back over the seaways to the lands from which they had come without her. The Greeks agreed to this, and so that the thing might be acceptable to the gods, Hector sent back into Troy for 2 lambs for sacrifice. When they were brought, Paris put on borrowed armor, for he had not come armed for battle, gleaming breastplate and leg guards, and a great helmet with a high nodding horsehair crest. And throughout the mighty war host of Greece and Troy, every man took off his own armor, for the sun grew hot, and settled down, leaning on his shield, to watch in comfort. Great picture of a warrior getting ready to go into battle with his armor and his horsehair crest on the top of his head. This is the end of Act number 8.